Welcome to HCI's Earth Day celebration today, this date of April 22, 2020. The events which are lined up in today's program are welcome address highlighting the significance of Earth Day celebration by Mr. Dijadas Ghoshal for about 10 minutes. Introduction of Healthy Climate Initiative by Dr. Soumitra Das for about 5 minutes. Talk by Dr. Sugata Hajra for about 15 minutes. Talks by Mr. Peter Fiakovsky, Mr. Rick Parnell, and Erika Dotz for about 40 minutes. Talk by Dr. Paul Jitz for 15 minutes. Vote of thanks by Mr. Chandan Bhattacharya for about 5 minutes. It is my honor to welcome you all, whoever is listening to our Facebook Live program of Healthy Climate Initiative today on this day of Earth Day celebration. What is Earth Day? Earth Day is all about appreciating the uniqueness of our planet Earth with its incredible biodiversity. Earth Day has become one of the most widely celebrated environmental events since 1970 across the globe. Objective of Earth Day celebration is to focus on protecting our nature, plants, animals and environment. Prior to Corona onslaught, we have the plan to organize this program at Shukanta Southern Barakpur, involving students and teaching communities of schools and colleges in and around Barakpur. Obviously, we had to cancel this program and decided to go for Facebook Live program today. It is nice that we can communicate to the whole world by virtue of the technology, although we are quarantined at home. Life is standstill in paralyzed world caused by a tiny virus. Lonely as a caged wild, man is a prisoner of his own mind. It is amazing that we can serve humanity by making kitchen as our capital. Unfortunately, April continues to fool us with how many more days in this month? And we just stop counting. Is Corona onslaught is due to climate change? We do not know that for sure. But the fact still remains that we can, if we obliterate their habitat, that is pangolin, they have to mutate and adapt themselves to their new territory. And what is that? It is us, the humanity. Dear students, I'm not speaking any stuff like a pandit, showing you some kind of chart, like how CO2 emission has touched 414 ppm by virtue of measurement at NASA OCO3 lab at JPL. Supposing I say that also, what does it mean to you? What about the permafrost explosion beneath the sea? What about the 80% lesser ice in summer in Arctic region compared to what it was during the onset of the century? And India's 105 million hectares, which is about 60% of the arable land, is undergoing land degradation. All these data may not shake you, but some facts definitely may. 1/3 of Bangladesh will be underwater in not too distant future. Polar bear will be extinct. What did I say? Polar bear. More than 3 lakh farmers committed suicide in India since 1995. And this is not my figure. These are all in the public domain. Do you know the story of Aisha in Ethiopia? Aisha, an amazing beauty in Ethiopia, who has been in the calendar girl for UNICEF, had has to work from morning 7 a.m. to 3:30 p.m. in the afternoon in the hot sun just to fetch 20 liters of water for family. Story is the same for millions of women who are grappling with water shortage because of climate change. Indonesia is changing her capital to Kalimantan in place of Jakarta. One of the reasons, seawater increase. Dear students, you are going to get the brunt of climate change in your generation more than us. Shouldn't you wake up to this reality? You should. What can you do, you can ask. Well, you can start using bicycle as much as possible, and why not? And it runs on your fat and good for the environment. I too also put on a lot of weight during this lockdown period. And you can stop using the plastic, do plantation, even house gardening by using kitchen waste to begin with is possible. Let me tell you a few words about HCI. Ours is an online community, as you know, aimed at sensitizing people for adopting an environmentally friendly lifestyle. Our objective is to conduct awareness campaigns, especially among students, interfacing with government for policy level decisions. And also to envision projects with technological fixes and other solution functionalities in respect of, say, land restoration, river revitalization, GHG emission, and plastic waste management. Ominous reason that propelled us to form this community is due to the fact that climate change is one of the most serious problems facing humanity today, with menacing possibilities of 6 mass extinction of the humanity. Climate change is real and the survival of the humanity is at stake. Earth is experiencing unprecedented scale of extreme weather events. We are already seeing the effects of climate change, hotter temperature, severe floods, hurricanes, pollution and whatnot. And also the lower crop, food shortage, human migration. Unless this is checked, it will get worse and destroy the human civilization in the future. Dear students, you have got two options. Let me tell you first the optimistic one. You have the new opportunity for the next green revolution based on cleaner technology and a low carbon economy. This option is the path of hope, a path of resolve and of sustainable solutions. Promise of hope and the promise for all of humanity. Other option is the path of surrender. That's what we have done. And we have sleepwalked past the point of no return. Nature may bring the nemesis in cruelest possible way, leading to our extinction. Believe me, we are on that path. Yes. Why tackling changing climate not at the top of everybody's agenda? Busy life. Because it is incremental and it is invisible. Is it that instead of climate change, we should say killer weather? We should use something like that, I guess. Tell me, why did the Stone Age end? Is it because the world ran out of the stones? It ended because there were better alternatives. Does this logic apply for fossil fuels today? What do you think? Can we not do anything if we unite? We are all aware of the anti-nuclear activism of 70s that saved the planet from nuclear proliferation by virtue of salt. We should appreciate that Safe Drinking Water Act, Protection Act for Endangered Species, banning of DDT pesticides, regulation of the G crop, etc. happened because of power of people. We no longer have the luxury of time. Let us act with a renewed sense of urgency. Climate change is still moving faster, and it presents an existential challenge to us, to all of us. Let us learn from the history. Do you know which of the civilizations faced the catastrophic consequence of environmental disaster because of the human action like, say, deforestation and land degradation? the Mayan civilization which lasted 3,000 years. Next comes the Mesopotamian civilization, the Eastern Island civilization that ended with cannibalism. The iconic Angkor Wat temple is a reminder of the province of another history's lost civilization. Do we really want to be remembered as a generation that fiddled like Nero while the Rome burned? In this context, this is our planet Earth. We look forward to hearing the panelists and experts here today and hope that our discussion will be part of the continued efforts to strengthen our initiative towards climate restoration. One last bit of good news. While it is costly to respond successfully to climate change, but we can afford it cheaply. Indeed, it is the best investment we could possibly make. It would be much more expensive not to respond. Corona has taught us this lesson. Thank you very much.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you are in this world. My name is Soumitra Das. I am a co-founder and president of Healthy Climate Initiative, or HCI in short. I will talk about HCI, its mission, its activities, and how you can help us in this movement. HCI was founded last year to restore climate. You'll hear more about climate restoration from its leaders later in the presentation. Since they are high school students, I will go over the basics of climate change very briefly so that they can follow the presentation and appreciate our mission better. Most of you know that the presence of excess greenhouse gases, primarily carbon dioxide, is causing climate change. Note the word I use, excess. We need a certain amount of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. Without carbon dioxide, planet would be too cold for us to survive. For thousands of years, that level has been 300 parts per million. Since Industrial Revolution, we have been pumping carbon dioxide recklessly in the air for the last 200 years. Once carbon dioxide is in the air, it remains there for centuries. As a result, the excess carbon dioxide is accumulating in the air for the last 200 years. Carbon dioxide absorbs the sun's heat, and more carbon dioxide is absorbing more heat from the sun. This is causing the planet to get hotter. It is like having a blanket over us, which is getting thicker and thicker over the years and making the planet hotter and hotter. It is that simple. What are the effects of climate change? Climate change is causing more and intense droughts, hurting crops and affecting poor farmers. It is causing more frequent and intense storms and hurricanes, costing lives and billions of dollars in damages. Sea level rise and devastating floods. More and frequent wildfires and causing of Arctic permafrost thaw and release of dangerous methane gas. If this continues unchecked, this will lead to the extinction of humanity. So what is the solution to this crisis? There are three pillars of solution: mitigation, adaptation, and climate restoration. The first pillar is the mitigation. It is the reduction of carbon emission by switching from fossil fuel energy to the renewables. The Paris Climate Agreement is based on climate mitigation strategies, which aim to reduce carbon emission to net zero by 2050. The second pillar is adaptation. Adaptation is exactly what it means. It is how we adapt to the changing climate. For example, we can migrate people living close to the water or mandate raising foundation of buildings or houses to protect from flooding. Adaptation does not combat the root cause of climate change. They are localized efforts to cope with its effect. The third pillar is climate restoration. It is fixing the damage in the climate by extracting carbon dioxide from the atmosphere and bringing it to 300 parts per million. HCI believes that mitigation and adaptation are necessary, but not sufficient to the survival of humanity. We need to remove carbon dioxide from the atmosphere to a safe level for our future generation. It is possible to do that in 30 years. We have the technology. What we need are people to demand for it. What are we doing to meet that objective? We are creating awareness among people. We cannot change the status quo unless people are aware of climate change. This is our most important objectives at the moment. We are partnering with similar organizations and strengthening the global movement for climate restoration. We are investigating potential opportunities of carbon negative materials in India. We are introducing summer internship program for college and high school students to create leaders for climate restoration. How can you help us in this movement? You can join us or create a HCI chapter for climate restoration in your college, high school, or community. Demand your politicians to act. Talk to your friends and colleagues about climate restoration. Write about it in your local newspapers or magazines. Or you may apply HCI summer internship program. Status quo is not acceptable. We have to change that. We have a moral obligation to act for our future generations and ourselves. Thank you for listening.
Prior to his talk, please allow me to introduce Dr. Shugata Hajra, a geologist by profession. He is a professor of coastal zone management and former director of School of Oceanographic Studies at Jadavpur University, India. He has done pioneering research on Sundarbans, climate change, and biophysical impact. He has led several international and national level research projects on Sundarbans and coastal oceans and has more than 100 international publications, edited volumes, monographs to his credit. He has mentored over 30 PhD students. Dr. Hazra has been a member of Indian Antarctic Expedition in the year 1996-97. He has been awarded the Corporate Award from ONGC and is a recipient of Gold Medal from Asiatic Society. Dr. Hazra is a member of West Bengal State Coastal Zone Management Authority nominated by the Government of India. Some of his ongoing projects include opportunities and trade-offs between the SDGs for food, welfare and the environment in deltas, tidal energy for village electricity supply in Indian Sundarban biosphere, vulnerability assessment of mangroves and corals of West Bengal, Orissa and Andaman Islands, study of carbon dynamics in estuaries and near sheer waters of Hooghly estuary, geospatial assessment of mangrove species, discrimination in Indian Sundarbans, their health and its effect on environment and climate using airborne hyperspectral and RISAT-1 remote sensing data, enhancing adaptive capacity and resilience to climate change of small and marginal farmers in Purulia and Bankura district in West Bengal, India through NABARD. Thank you, Dr. Sugata Hazra, for your enlightening speech and wonderful insight into the subject. Thank you.
Hello, welcome to our Earth Day celebration. Today we'll be discussing about the preparedness of climate change in the Sundarban Delta, West Bengal, India. We shall discuss the topic in the light of the present COVID-19 pandemic, which has brought the world to a standstill since the past few weeks, resulting in loss of over 200,000 lives, morbidity, and loss of livelihood of millions of people across the world. However, even few months back, it was unthinkable that such worldwide crisis will force us to take collective and independent action to avert it, even at the cost of economic slowdown and compromised individual freedom. But the warnings were there. In 2015, Bill Gates, in one of his TED Talks, had cautioned the world. He has said that global catastrophe in the next 10 years was not to be caused by nuclear warfare, but rather by pandemic caused by a highly infectious virus for which we are not prepared. The warning was preceded by the outbreak of two new zoonotic viruses, SARS in 2003 and H1N1 swine flu pandemic in 2009. While we had been able to contain the spread of the diseases in these cases, and scientists had been able to develop an effective vaccine against swine flu within a very short period, we have not been able to prepare ourselves to face a much bigger outbreak of SARS-CoV-2 novel coronavirus in 2019 that threatens us today. We have failed to prepare the health delivery system in the megacities and rural townships in order to combat the diseases. We have lost precious time, and now we are doing what we are doing is crisis management at the cost of life and livelihood. Similarly, in 2015, during the Paris Summit of Climate Change, scientists had warned the global community about an impending climate crisis. Unless we can reduce our carbon emission through change in the lifestyle, unless we can reduce the rapid rise of temperature, we are bound to face unprecedented phenomena like rapid melting of glaciers, sea level rise, and unpredictable climatic patterns, climatic extremes like cyclones and droughts, cloudbursts, heat waves, loss of agriculture and livelihood, along with spread of emerging diseases like Ebola, dengue, Nipah or SARS. But the world powers have failed to take action. In fact, one of the superpowers has also withdrawn from the climate agreement, citing that such a reduction in the fossil fuel use might force them to change their lifestyle, which was unacceptable. As a result, we are continuing to emit more and more carbon, temperatures are rising, glaciers in Greenland and Antarctica are melting at an alarming rate with rising high-intensity cyclone, sea level is rising at a faster rate. In our own backyard, in the Sundarban Delta, it is losing land to the sea, again at an alarming rate. Further, in 2019, there was an unprecedented delay in arrival of monsoon here. Actually, they cannot remember whether it has happened in the last 100 years or so. So which took almost the 5 million people of the area by panic of losing their mainstay of livelihood, that's agriculture. The mangrove forest, a global heritage and a Ramsar site, is not only losing forest area to the advancing sea, but is continuing to show evidences of degradation in health, stunted growth, along with increasing salinity in the surroundings. We are losing the blue carbon stock of the world's largest carbon sink. Agricultural output is diminishing steadily in the area, along with marine fishery output and loss of biodiversity. Diseases like dengue, malaria, kala-jar, upper respiratory tract infections, hepatitis, tuberculosis and hypertension are now very common in the 19 community development blocks of the Sundarban area. However, if we think of the health services of these 5 million people spread across 50 islands, we have less than 200 doctors, around 50 odd health centers, 14 rural hospitals and 1 specialty hospital can accommodate not more than 1200 patients for treatment. It is obvious that in such a situation, testing for COVID-19 infection could not be started in Sundarban. Even during the present lockdown, during March end, river embankments were broken and salt water entered in the villages of Bashanti, Moshuni or G-plot during the equinoctial tide. It is only in the early 2019 that Government of India could accept that the Sundarban is facing the highest rate of sea level rise in India. Scientists were warning that the Sundarban Delta, with its unique biodiversity and population density, is becoming a high-risk global climate hotspot. This view was also echoed in the Paris Climate Conclave in 2015. However, without much ground-level action. Thus, we do not have any climate adaptation plan for the country or for the Sundarbans as yet. The State Climate Action Plan laid out several action agenda in 2011 for Sundarban area without any budgetary provision. We do not have any action taken report so far and are unable to prepare with new and improved plans. During cyclones like Bulbul, we have emergency action plan to evacuate exposed population from the vulnerable area. But the concept of long-term strategic retreat from the areas highly vulnerable to land erosion and submergence remained only in scientific vision documents. We are not yet prepared to face the climate emergencies in the world in the face of unabated temperature rise. Some of my optimistic friends are sending me beautiful photographs of dancing deer in the Puri sea beach or on the asphalt road of Uti, or forwarding news about nature is healing itself and reclaiming the lost ground in the time of global lockdown. But I'm afraid that such a short-term healing will not be able to arrest the abnormal warming of the oceans up to its 700 meters of depth. We need to act in much more sustainable manner in order to be prepared for a much bigger and a long-term crisis perpetuated by global warming and climate change in the world in general and in the Sundarban Delta in particular. In this planning for a long-term preparedness in Sundarban Delta, I would like to propose 5 action points for your consideration. A top priority must be given to public health delivery system at the community level. Actions must be taken to augment fresh water supply to meet ecological and agricultural demand by river restorations, subsurface desalination and rainwater harvesting. Rural network of public distribution system needs to be strengthened at village level to ensure food security for the people in the Delta. Sustainable agriculture rather than quick profit making needs to be achieved at the earliest, ensuring proper support price for crops to the farmers through a distributed marketing network. And people's participation and gender equity should be prioritized in every level of such preparedness plan and its implementation. I wish to emphasize the need for gender segregated data to draw up any such strategy to combat long-term climate crisis or short-term crisis like COVID-19 outbreak. Barring few European countries, we or even the US do not have gender disaggregated data on number of infected person or the death toll of COVID-19 in the public domain. This points towards our gender blindness during planning and management of any such disasters. We cannot win this battle against climate change keeping half of our people uninvolved. I am hopeful that our doctors and health workers and the people in general shall be able to arrest the pandemic, and our scientists will gift us a much awaited vaccine against the devastating disease in near future. However, I am afraid there is no such vaccine against climate change, and we ourselves need to be prepared at the individual, national and global levels to embrace a more sustainable lifestyle in order to win the struggle for existence in the Sundarban Delta and in the world. Let this be our pledge in this Earth Day. And thank you.
Our next topic is climate restoration leadership in conversation. These leaders are Peter Fiakovsky, co-founder and chairman of Foundation of the Climate Restoration, Rick Parnell, CEO of Foundation of the Climate Restoration, and Dr. Erica Dodds, Chief Operating Officer, Foundation of Climate Restoration. They will discuss about the origin of the idea of climate restoration, the strategy of the foundation, progress, and next steps. Please welcome Peter, Rick, and Erica.
So thank you so much for being here today. We've got Rick Parnell, the CEO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, former COO of the United Nations Foundation. We have Peter Fikowski. He is the founder and chairman of the Foundation for Climate Restoration, an MIT trained physicist. And Dr. Erica Dodds, she's the COO of the Foundation for Climate Restoration. I'm Alexandra Pony with Pony Communications, and I work with the Foundation for Climate Restoration, and I am dedicated to restoring the climate. So, Peter, how did you come up with the idea of climate restoration?
Well, I've committed myself to leaving a world we're proud of to our children, and I think we all want that. And when it comes to the climate, it got very clear that we're making very good progress on poverty and all sorts of things, reducing hunger. But all of that progress is going to be useless if we don't restore the climate and do something about to keep agriculture going and so on. And so I've been working for 35 years in poverty reduction as a volunteer, and I realized I had to take climate restoration on. And it turns out to be a new idea, because as a physicist, I knew when I was 20 years old, 45 years ago, that we had to get the carbon back out of the atmosphere. And the common knowledge has been we have to stop emitting, which was true when I was young, when I was a child. But now we have to get that carbon out that we've put in ever since. And so I created the foundation to advance that thinking, that what we really want is to leave for younger generations the same healthy climate that I had when I was a child.
Nice. So what is climate restoration?
So let me take that one, Peter. I'm going to tell a very short story. Alexandra, you know I love stories, but so I was at the United Nations Foundation for just over 17 years, and I had retired from there and was trying to think about what I wanted to do next, and climate's always been a passion. And I was at a summit, the Forbes Summit, and I ran into Peter Fikowski, and he was telling me all about how we're going to restore the climate. And I had been in what I call the climate wars for so many years. I said, Peter, what do you mean restore the climate? You can't restore the climate. There's so much damage done and all of that. And then after a few hours of conversations back and forth between sessions, Peter convinced me we actually can restore the climate. And for me, the aha moment was that if you think in terms of all the work that we're doing globally on mitigation and adaptation, and all the conversations that are so critically important about net zero and getting to zero carbon emissions by 2050, what you don't hear a lot about is that 95% of the carbon that's causing the global warming, the ice melting, all of the conditions will still be there if we don't remove it. So climate restoration at its simplest term, there's some other pieces to it, but its simplest term is let's get that carbon that we've been putting up there for the last 2 centuries out and get us back down to pre-industrial levels of under 300 parts per million, where man and humanity has survived and thrived for thousands of years. So we're working in a business driven, a market-driven approach towards what are the technologies, what are the solutions, both technological and natural, that can be deployed in order to remove the excess carbon that has been in the atmosphere and building over the last 200 years. What would you add, Peter?
That's it. That is exactly it. The critical part is getting very clear about who are we doing it for. The big transition is when I started, we thought that we were doing it for nature. And of course we want nature to do well. But nature will do well even if humans aren't here. So first we have to make sure that humans survive. And of course, for humans to survive, we have to have nature. But it's a certain kind of nature that we need, not the kind of nature that kept the dinosaurs alive. And unfortunately, that's the direction we're heading in again. Right.
I think this last month we've seen, and I mean this with all the sincerity, but the last month we've seen a lot of nature begin to come back in some ways. You've seen the canals in Venice with fish reappearing, and you've seen the dolphins are off the bays in Italy, and it's nature would be fine without us. It's the humanity that we need to be taking care of here. So when people talk about people and planet, it really is people and planet, but the planet will be okay long after humanity is gone. So we're really working hard to make sure that humanity survives and thrives for generations to come.
Well, the other important part is once you say that that you want humanity to survive, we actually know exactly what's required. And so the big transition now is going from focusing on just nature as a big thing to the nature that humans need and humanity. And then we can say, oh, we know exactly what we need to get CO2 below 300 parts per million. And if you don't know what that means, it just means that we know exactly where we want to go, and we want to do it by the year 2050. By making an explicit goal, then getting there becomes vastly easier than if you don't have a goal. So like going on a vacation. If you go to your spouse and say, let's go on vacation, you're not likely to go on get very far. But if you say, let's go to New York on next October 1st, you'll probably do it. And that's what climate restoration is specifically what and by when, so we can deliver.
So is it actually possible to remove the trillion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere?
The short answer is yes. The longer answer is yes, and we will be figuring out a lot more about the specifics that requires as we work towards that goal. Right now, people tend to argue over, do we have the technology? Yes or no? Is the timeline too short? We say 300 parts per million or less by the year 2050. And most people are still saying maybe we can reach net zero by 2050. But like Rick said, 95% of the carbon is already in the atmosphere. So net zero by 2050 leaves us in a pretty scary place. But, if you had asked in the year 2007 whether it was possible to give 50% of the world smartphones by 2050, there was no reason to think that would be the case. And now, even in the poorest countries, they're widespread. So once you have a goal, once you have a start, which we already do, then these things become much easier. Peter pointed out to me a while ago that from the time we invented submarines, we needed to know how to take carbon dioxide out of the air. So it's not like this is a completely new and emerging technology. We are learning to do it much more efficiently and much more cheaply. But a lot of articles out there will talk about direct air capture as this new and emerging technology. In reality, it's just a refinement of processes that we've known for many decades. So yes, it's possible.
And maybe I'll add to that when it comes to technology, the question isn't what's possible, the question is what's impossible. Because anything is possible if you work hard enough on it. But of course, some things are probably impossible. Jumping over Jupiter is probably impossible. But so then the question is there anything that's impossible about removing the trillion tons of CO2 by the year 2050? And I know dozens and dozens of top scientists in the area, and no one has ever asserted that it's impossible physically. And they're just wondering whether we're going to ever decide we want to do it. And of course, scientists aren't trained in the field that we are, which is creating political will for a goal. We're trained in that.
It's about political will, and it's about making the investment and having the incentives around it. So whether it's policy incentives or your constituent incentives. And one of the things that we're doing at the Foundation for Climate Restoration is we talk all the time about building the ecosystem necessary for full restoration. And our belief is that you have to meet everyone where they are. So that's in the workplace, that's in the youth place, that's in the, as I say, in the pews. So working with different faiths, working with the UN. The UN is a great partner through the United Nations Office of Partnerships. We launched actually at the UN last September during General Assembly. So it is our belief that you have to work across all these different sectors, because not only does it keep people well informed about what it is we're trying to do, and you have that sort of, as I say, that aha moment of, wow, we actually can restore the climate. Why don't we make that choice to do it? Why aren't we putting the politics and the investment behind it? And so you can't just take one track. You have to do all the tracks.
And, from the science perspective, one of the things that makes anything impossible is not trying. So if we hadn't tried to make cell phones, we would not have had billions of cell phones, but we tried. And so until we started the foundation and the movement for climate restoration, there was nobody trying to restore the climate. And so it actually was impossible. People thinking that it's impossible was true, but now we're trying. And so it's now possible. And for the people viewing this, we're preparing this for Earth Day 50. The whole purpose of Earth Day is to get people to try to actually work on the things that we all collectively want.
You're in good company, Peter. I used to work for the great Senator Worth, a big climate leader for years, and he used to say, if you don't ask, you have 100% chance of not getting it, or failing, or if you don't try, 100% chance of failing. So we will absolutely try, and I'm fully committed that we will succeed.
And what is the Foundation for Climate Restoration?
So the Foundation for Climate Restoration is a 501c3 private foundation in the United States that works for full restoration of the climate. We work across all different sectors. So we work with technology entrepreneurs. We work with local governments. We work with national governments. We work with organizations, membership organizations like Earth Day Network and others. We work with universities like Cambridge University and Thunderbird Business School in Arizona State. We work in the faith community across from the Vatican to all the different faiths to bring the political will and to help build the ecosystem around full restoration of the climate. For me, it's that wherever people are, which is why we talk a lot about the ecosystem development, wherever you are, whether you're in school, whether you're in a business, you're an employee, you're an employer, if you're in a church, in a synagogue, in a mosque, you're in your local government, you're in your voting booth, you should be doing as much as you can to call for all of your constituents of your life to join us in full restoration of the climate.
So I want to learn more about these technologies. What technologies are out there to restore the climate?
There's a fair number. Of course, Erica mentioned that there's the variations on the technologies that were developed 100 years ago for submarines, which chemically take the CO2 out of air. And the main issue is, rather than listing 40 different techniques, I'm going to talk about the ones that fit our criteria. So if we want to restore the climate, then the solution needs to be permanent. We need to keep the CO2 out of the air more or less permanently for at least 100 or 200 years. It has to be scalable. It has to get all the CO2 out that we need to get out. Getting out 1% of it is nice, but we want to focus on the techniques that can get all of the CO2 out. And so it has to be permanent, it has to be scalable, and it has to be financeable. If no one's going to pay for it to happen, it's a pipe dream. And there's nothing wrong with pipe dreams. It's a dream you have smoking a certain kind of pipe. But that's not how you get things done in the physical world. And so we're focusing on permanent, financeable, and scalable. And when you do that, it turns out it's very, very exciting. When I worked on our white paper, I realized that the methods that fit those, they're all biomimicry. They all mimic how nature has taken carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere various times over the last 2 billion years. And that's a good sign, because we know that when nature has done it for a long time, nature has adapted to whatever the changes are. And so we don't have to worry too much about it being safe, because nature has been doing it. So then specifically, 99%, the first thing is synthetic limestone. And that sounds surprising at first, but on our planet, 99% of all carbon is held in limestone in the crust. That's where it ended up. It used to be in the air, and then ocean critters turned it into shells and things like that, and it became limestone. We can do the same chemistry in a laboratory or in a big factory and sell that limestone for use for roads and buildings. It's very nice. The market is there. We use 7 tons of rock every year per man, woman, and child for all of our roads. It's unbelievable, but it's exactly the amount we need to get back to a proven safe climate by 2050. Another approach is restoring photosynthesis in the ocean. With nature, we all know that a lot of the carbon on our planet is stored in coal and oil. Well, of course, we're burning that coal and oil, putting it back into the air, and that's the whole problem with global warming. And so the way nature produced that coal and oil was with a photosynthesis in the ocean. And then the biocarbon, that is the plants would get eaten by animals, and all of them and their detritus would sink towards the bottom, and in certain circumstances turn into coal and oil. The planet's a little bit cool to do that, but it can still accumulate on the bottom. And again, there's so much sunlight on the ocean and so much water that if you provide the nutrients, then you get all the photosynthesis you need, and you get the biocarbon falling to the bottom of the ocean. And the way that gets financed is it produces a lot of fish. Just like with land animals, if you give them food, they grow. If you give fish phytoplankton, algae, green food, then the fish grow. And then you can sell some of the fish and use some of that for paying for the nutrients. And the way to look at that is, on land, when we have farms and the water comes from the ocean. So the land needs the ocean for water. Well, the ocean needs the land for nutrients, for dust, basically. And so this method puts the necessary dust in certain parts of the ocean for short times, just like a dust storm or just like a volcano, to produce the nutrients, produce the phytoplankton, and then the biocarbon falls.
Let me pick up there and say what I have observed. We were in a conversation a few weeks ago with one of our partners, and they said, what you have to understand is that the work that you're talking about is 10 to 15 years in the future. And so always think about as you're telling people about your work, that you're telling them 10, 15 years from now. And what I mean by that is that, to Erica's point about in 2007, 2008, you wouldn't have thought about smartphones being, halfway around the world or all the way around the world. Back in the early 2000s, no one would have believed that solar and wind could have been cheaper than fossil fuels. No one would have thought about the kinds of, when I went to a conference not even 3 years ago, and there was conversations about the fact that there wouldn't be combustible engines past the year 2024, 25. And now you have automobile manufacturers talking about that they will stop making combustible engines. So, 10 years ago, 15 years ago, that was unthinkable. So when you think about some of the stuff that we're talking about now, it's just beginning to come online. And that's, again, back to the ecosystem. It has to be grown. It has to have space. And so what you're beginning to see now is, we work with the Cambridge Center for Climate Repair under Sir David King in Cambridge, in the UK. And what they're starting to talk about is solutions need to be tested. Why aren't they being tested more? We have a colleague who we're working with for the Ocean Climate Restoration Alliance. And what they're looking at is what are the 6 or 7 kinds of solutions that Peter's describing that need to be tested, rigorously tested, and then can be deployed. But we weren't seeing any of this kind of testing over the last few years. It's only now that people are really beginning to say, what if? And could we, that you're starting to see the kind of testing, you're starting to see governments pay attention, you're starting to see investors pay attention. We're seeing a big, one of the reasons why we go with a market approach is that we see a lot of investors that coming out of the IPCC report 2 years ago on 1.5 degrees, when they talked a little bit, not enough, a little bit about carbon removal and carbon removal technologies, now you have investors out there saying, I'm ready to invest, but I can't find anything to invest in. That's a bit of an overstatement, but I mean, there's not a whole lot out there. And so part of this ecosystem development is, let's start connecting these dots. When you go to different meetings and conferences, you hear about things that the investors don't know, that the entrepreneurs are working on, and the universities are testing, but they're not coordinating. And so that's one of our big goals, is to try and really bring all of these together.
For the audience listening to this, it's very important for the investors to know that people like what they're doing. I invest in certain things and I like sharing about it with my family and friends. And they say, oh, that's so cool. You're investing in whatever that is. If I had money, I'd invest in Tesla because I love Tesla cars, for example. I want to have one. And so it's important, the action that listeners can take is really to share that you really want climate restoration and you want investors to invest in it, because they're not investing in it because none of their friends are telling them that it's important because they'd never heard of it.
And along the same lines, we've found that, like Rick said, investors who want to invest in climate restoration don't really know what to do. Part of the reason for that is that even though there's increasing attention on carbon removal technologies, there's not a lot of distinction out there between different kinds of carbon removal technologies. So Peter was saying, we really look for things that meet our 3 criteria of permanence, scalability, and financeability. But if you look up any carbon removal technologies on the internet or you hear about them in conversation, almost no one can tell you how they rate on those criteria because no one else is talking about them yet. So one of the things that we've been spending a lot of time on is discussing how can we make it clear to the public what the difference is, for example, between something like the Trillion Trees Initiative, which is a critical ecosystem restoration initiative that will absolutely capture carbon, and something like Peter was describing, where we produce synthetic limestone, which will permanently capture larger quantities of carbon. They're both very much needed and important endeavors, but most people don't yet understand the difference between them in terms of the climate restoration criteria. So we're hoping that by making that clearer to investors, we'll be able to shift the investment dollars into these climate restoration industries.
Thank you. So Erica, you touched on synthetic limestone, but I'd love to hear a little bit more about it and the commercial market for it.
As Peter mentioned, we use about 50 billion tons per year of rock, and it's about $1 trillion market. The thing I think is so interesting about this is before we started asking what it would take to restore the climate, we never would have known the size of this market and how much carbon it can hold. So going back to the question of, is this possible? The better question is always going to be, what would it take for this to happen? What would it take to restore the climate? So when we started talking to some of our partners who are working on climate restoration solutions and asking, what would it take for your solution to restore the climate? We found that they had never considered this before. It's just way outside the scope of their thinking, which makes sense. I mean, you kind of have to be an egomaniac, right? To think like, oh, my solution is going to absolutely save the climate. But once they started thinking about it, they could say, it would take about this many plants, it would take about this many years, this many dollars. And now they've started building a business plan that incorporates that thinking. And, it's really by asking, by putting out the criteria, and starting people thinking bigger that we get on the right path.
Thank you. So we've talked a lot about restorative efforts. And so what about our efforts to reduce emissions? Is that still important if we can just pull CO2 out of the atmosphere?
Absolutely. I mean, Peter's the expert, so I will turn it to him in a second. But if you think of it in terms of, we have a little video that sometimes we show that if you think in terms of the Earth being sitting in a bathtub, and the bathtub is full of overflowing with carbon. Well, even if we were to pull the plug and which is what we're working on, and get the carbon out of the bathtub, if you don't turn the faucet off, it's just going to keep filling up. So of course we need to have net zero. We need to end the use of fossil fuels and bring down to under 300 parts per million the CO2, but they have to do hand in glove. Kathleen Rogers, president of Earth Day Network, and she has a very big week next week, but president of Earth Day Network, she's the one who coined it with us, who said that climate restoration is the third leg of the stool. Mitigation, adaptation, critically important, but you got to do the third leg because you got to get the carbon out. So they have to fit together.
Yeah, emission reduction. The good news is that it's happening. I'm not the only person who wants to have a Tesla for his or her next car, and more solar panels on my roof. That movement is happening, and we need to keep having it happen. We all want the survival of humanity, and so our job is to have people focus on what's missing that's not already happening. So we want to keep the emissions reduction happening for many reasons. Health is one of the big reasons, and realize that that's only part of the problem. Part of the solution, the main solution, as Erica said, is get the 1 trillion tons of carbon out of the atmosphere.
And so what can individuals do to support your efforts?
We're going to ask everyone to join us and take the pledge to restore the climate. It's going to be available at f4cr.org. And when you take that pledge, you're saying that your entire, your own personal ecosystem, that you're taking the commitment to work to restore the climate. Some of the things you can do, I'll tell you about a campaign that we launched in Santa Clara, California, with a local county supervisor, Dave Cortese. We were there in discussions, and he said to me, this was middle of last year, and he said to me, we're doing climate emergency and we're doing everything we can. How do we do more? And then we came up with the idea of become the first local government to take on climate restoration. Now, what that means is that for their long-term planning, their budgeting, their municipal buildings, all of that, they can require them to be carbon negative buildings, not just carbon neutral. So that's huge, but it takes wanting to have your constituency in your local government call for that. So you can hold your local government accountable. Wherever you are in the world, you can hold your local government accountable. You can hold your faith leader accountable. Soon you will be able to go to our website and you'll be able to download some toolkits for youth organizing in your local community, and how you can work with fellow youths around climate restoration. And you can talk to your employer about different things. I mean, you see a lot of the different companies and organizations, they go through this process to have their headquarters and their buildings become LEED standard. You can do the same thing. You can ask your employer to take a look at what kind of things can we do to be looking at carbon negative building materials and other such things. Erica, what would you add?
Yeah, we have a list of actions you can take on our website, f4cr.org. After the pledge, there is a list of actions that we will keep updating as we come up with more things for people to do. So over time, our needs shift and the actions will shift accordingly. So yes, we have that petition for the local governments. Of course, like any good nonprofit, we are always looking for donations. We have social media toolkits that you can share. We have all kinds of tools for you. So please do check that out. But most importantly at this point is just talk to everyone you know. Talk to your family and friends, educators, etc. Make sure that people know that climate restoration is a possibility and is the next natural step in our climate journey. So yeah, get the word out.
And let me add that when you talk with your friends and your neighbors, remember they're already on your side. It took me a long time to figure this out, so I don't want you to go through the same painful process I had. I was trying to convince people that we really do want the survival of humanity. That was a terrible thing for me to do because people were insulted. I was implying that I thought that they didn't want the survival of humanity and a proven safe climate. Everyone wants that. And all the opportunity that you have as an individual is to take it from implied to explicit. Until 50 years ago, we never had to think about it because we knew that humanity would survive. When I was young, we knew we would survive. well, it's now at stake, and now we get to take that desire for a safe climate from implied to explicit.
So could I say something, Alex, about when we were at the United Nations last September, and we had the first ever Global Climate Restoration Forum, first annual, and our second annual, pending everything going on now, will be in September of this year. But our first annual, we brought together all kinds of different groups from the private sector that had solutions, investors that were looking for investments, leadership, youth, the Vatican, the United Nations Environment Program, all kinds of different groups coming together to talk about climate restoration. And one of the groups that really struck a chord with me is there was a 16-year-old young woman from Chicago who had come in to see the forum. And the next day we were in a conversation, and she said, you know, I came into this thinking as a 16-year-old I did not have a future. And she said, I'm leaving here and going back home realizing I have a future. It is possible to restore the climate. And for me, that's, you know, as Peter said at the beginning of the conversation, that's the whole reason we're doing this, is to be sure that future generations can survive and thrive. And, you know, when you hear, we had we kicked off our task force on climate restoration at Davos, Switzerland this past January. And we had a young woman stand up and speak. She's a 14-year-old gifted speaker. And she talked about how every decision that they make as a youth, your job, whether to have a family, everything you do is driven by the climate. And for me, an old guy like me, that just tears me apart to think that people coming up, their whole life ahead of them, and they have to think about these kinds of different things. Where can they live? Because will it be flooded? Will there be jobs? Will there be food? All those kinds of things. And it's our responsibility to make sure that we fix all of that before 2050. That this should be the generation that gets this done, and not leave it to the next generation.
So who are other partners with the foundation? Is anyone else working on climate restoration, or who's supportive of it?
Well, Earth Day Network, they have been a great partner over the last almost a year, and you're going to hear more from them in the coming time. I won't say more than that. That's for them to talk about. But and of course, the United Nations Office of Partnership has been a great partner. We've been in discussions with a lot of new partners. We've been talking with member states at the UN about some of the work that we're doing in climate restoration. We're seeing investment groups. Boundless Impact is a wonderful investment group that is looking at solutions. X Prize has been a great partner. They spoke at the forum. They have an entire prize dedicated to carbon removal technologies. Thunderbird University at the Arizona State, Thunderbird Business School, they are an incredible partner. We started working together last fall, and they're actually our partner on, as I said, the Task Force for Climate Restoration that we launched at Davos back in January. You're going to hear more about that, especially if you take the pledge and sign up, so we can continue to send you information and let you know new things that develop, especially in your community. Because we are going to work across different countries and regions on the task force. But the idea of the task force are, what are some of the policies, the solutions, the roadblocks that need to be addressed, the research in order to fully restore the climate. And Thunderbird University has been a wonderful partner on all of this. As I said, Santa Clara County is been an incredible partner under Dave Cortese's leadership. He even came to the UN and called on local governments across the world to take on climate restoration at the local level. So yes, and they grow daily, more and more partners every single day. I guess I would turn around the other way and say that, as Peter said earlier, this is an issue that once people understand it, they absolutely, no one ever walks away and says, well, I don't want to restore the climate. Everybody wants to restore the climate. Everybody wants to do this. It's just that this is people having that, as I said, the aha moment of that it's possible, and really understanding that, again, we think that mitigation and adaptation are critical, but that won't finish the job. that it's our job to ensure that we get the full job done, all three parts of it.
So what is the most exciting progress you've seen so far on climate restoration?
Yeah, I'll start. I would say that the greatest progress, I'm going to leave the technical to Peter, the greatest progress is when you're seeing faith leaders, when you're seeing UN leaders, when you're seeing corporate leaders, when you're seeing investors, when you're seeing youth. We have some youth, some teen advisors that are working with us. When you see 17-year-olds saying, yeah, this is the right path, we should restore the climate. To me, the most exciting is that people are starting to connect the dots and starting to come together around what's possible. So, for me, it's that once you make that leap to understand about full restoration of the climate, the rest of it is, that's the hardest part for people, is getting there. Again, not that they don't want to, but really understanding the solutions that are possible and how to grow them. And then there's the technology piece of it. I mean, I think the building materials and increasingly, we've only talked about concrete, but there's a new technology that can do, I won't call them skyscrapers, but many, many multi-story buildings made out of wood. So that's a new technology. And so there's lots of different things that you're seeing. There's some methane removal technologies that through some feedstock for cows that's coming online that reduces methane by 80%. That's a new technology. That's not a full climate restoration, but it's new kinds of technologies that are coming online. What would you say, Peter? What's the most exciting you're seeing out there?
Well, the most exciting is the interest from the United Nations and from the Vatican and the religious community, because really they're the high priests about what's important for humanity. So that's where you started. Then, technologically, what really excited me was when we named the goal of getting CO2 below 300 by the year 2050. And then discovering that there were methods to do it. That was really exciting. And then a couple of years later, discovering that there are methods that can do it that we can afford, that we don't need any new act of Congress to implement. And so, of course, there are acts of Congress that will be wonderful. But even if that never happens, there are some of the methods, even if the economy collapses, we can still do it. And that's what's exciting, is that there's technically there's nothing stopping us, and our human infrastructure is such, like with regards to fish, that we're always going to be buying fish as long as there are humans, and that's enough to pay for accelerating nature's way of getting carbon out at the fastest rate.
We've talked about our ecosystem approach for climate restoration, and when we started out working on this, we went to the scientists and said, is this possible? And they said, I don't know, we need to do some research, but we can't get funding for that research. We went to the funding bodies and they said, well, we're not going to put money into something if it's not a political priority. Went to the politicians and they said, well, we're not going to make policy priorities without public demand. And the public, of course, said, why would I say that something is a priority when there's no evidence that it's possible? So now we're working on all of those fronts simultaneously, and they're all moving. Yes. So for me, just any movement at all, but we've seen quite a lot on all of those fronts, has been just thrilling.
So can you reiterate to people how they can get involved and what they can do, where they should go?
The first thing they should do is go to f4cr.org. Again, that's f4cr.org, and take the pledge so that we can keep you informed and you can learn more about not only what's going on globally, but what's hopefully, as we develop this, what's going on in your local community. So that's one. Hold everyone in your life accountable for the full restoration of the climate. So again, wherever it is that you spend your time, whether it's in the faith, it's in the workplace, it's with youth, it's in the schools, wherever you are, hold everyone accountable for restoration of the climate. And what I mean by accountable is that this is not you're accountable. It's that we all want to be a part of this. Give them the opportunity to be a part of this, and people will want to. I guarantee you. So I think that's the next. That's the easiest thing for everybody to quickly get involved. What you're going to see, I mean, we're in a different world right now, understandably, but we're continuing. Nothing stops. We've had some great meetings and some great convenings through this kind of a venue. We have our forum in September. We have, COP26 will happen. It won't happen in the same date, but it will happen, and climate restoration will be there. So we will continue. We are building out the task force. Again, if you sign up, you'll be kept abreast of that. We're building out our youth initiative. We're getting more and more partners to the table. So we're just going to continue to grow this ecosystem.
Okay, well, thank you so much. This has been wonderful.
Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you to all the audience who's watching. Thank you for your interest in climate restoration.
And please be safe and be well.
Our next speaker is Dr. Paul Gites. Dr. Gites will talk about waging optimism, a pathway to ensure the survival and flourishing of humanity, and climate restoration emergency action. Dr. Paul Gites is a physician, epidemiologist, and award-winning advocate for global justice and human rights. He currently serves as the founder of Built a Movement 2020 and is co-chair of the COVID-19 Emergency Response Group. Please welcome Dr. Paul Gites.
Good afternoon. Hi, my name is Dr. Paul Gites, and I'm the Executive Director and founder of Build a Movement 2020. I'm so excited to be here today with all of you and the Healthy Climate Initiative of India in recognition and in honor of Earth Day, April 22nd, 2020. We are living in an extraordinary time of the COVID-19 pandemic. We're seeing the economic fragility and collapse and depression that's occurring in many places, as well as the challenges to democracy and, of course, the ongoing climate emergency. We are living in auspicious times. We are living in an epic time. We're living in a time of despair and dire circumstances, and at the same time, we're living in a time of potentiality and possibility and transformation for what's possible going forward. I'm excited today to speak to you about some of the work that I'm doing and some of my own personal philosophies. I'm hoping that my talk today will be complementary to what you've already heard and that it'll help you process all the information that I know all the other speakers have been giving to you. I wanted to start off by talking about my personal philosophy and my political vision for restoring a safe and healthy climate. So from a personal philosophy perspective, the information about the climate emergency, the state of the rising global temperatures, the trillion tons of CO2 that we've already pumped up into the atmosphere, the devastating collapse of the Arctic, which is a refrigerator for the planet basically and controls our weather patterns, the decimation of land and ocean and species and life as a result of the climate emergency. It's overwhelming, and it can be quite despairing. And I have myself struggled at times to break myself out of despair and hopelessness at the state of the problem. And when I'm in a state of despair or hopelessness, I'm more likely to just want to pull my covers over my head and lay under a blanket and not take any action. And I become complacent. I become inactive. I become confused. And in some ways, I'm complicit with the terrible situation that we're in. And so what I've been working on is how do I develop a personal philosophy for managing the real dire circumstances and despair that causes and balance that out with creating myself as in a way that I can take bold, relentless, courageous action in light of these circumstances. So I published a book recently called Waging Optimism, which is ushering in a new era of justice, is the title of the book. And this is part one. And this book, part one, focuses on ensuring the survival and flourishing of humanity, which is the topic of this seminar that you're in today. In terms of, and I hope it's like a pamphlet, so it's a short little book, but I hope there'll be part 2 and part 3 that I'm working on and will publish later in the year or into 2021. So I'd like to start out by sharing where the book starts, which is in the future. And one of the things that I've learned to do is envision a positive future. So I am, the preface of the book is actually Vision 2030. I won't read the whole thing, but I'll read the part that relates to our topic today, which is addressing the climate emergency. So I'm imagining that I'm standing on December 31st, 2030, about a decade from now, and this is what humanity is at. This is where we're at. Each human is now seen as an equal part of a greater whole. Families, communities, and nations are connecting in an inclusive healing movement, joining forces to tackle the existential challenges facing humanity. The combustible engine is almost completely gone, except for a few relics in museums and garages. There is no place to buy fossil fuels. All you see on the streets are automated and electric vehicles that move everyone around more efficiently and safely than ever imagined. Our global energy systems are transforming, and we are now living in healthy harmony with the ecological and climate systems of Earth. We have transformed our energy systems to 100% clean and renewable, and we are using a tiny reserve of fossil fuel lubricants for a few industrial processes. New industries are creating millions of jobs for people around the world to support the robust green transformation. Communities around the US and world are using natural and technical solutions to remove 1 trillion tons of CO2 from the atmosphere. Humanity woke up from the nightmare that we were destined for extinction. We seized the opportunity of climate restoration and proceeded rapidly once we realized this challenge could be addressed. No one believed it was possible, and yet humanity immobilized itself over the past 10 years to achieve 3 major goals. All countries of the world achieved net zero carbon emissions. The world mobilized and deployed natural and technical solutions to remove CO2 back to proven safe levels. Global warming eased, the melting of the Arctic and Antarctic ice shelves slowed, and hope emerged that humanity could survive and flourish for generations. So I won't read any more of that right now, but I think for me, I like to live from a positive future of possibility and then come back in time. So today it's April 22nd, 2020, and I'm living into the possibility that we will have achieved victory and we will have transformed everything in order to ensure the survival and flourishing of humanity. That's living from the future to the present, rather than bringing the sense of failure and desperation from the past into the future. So it's a different way of experiencing my life. And with that, when that kind of positive possible future, it helps me be more optimistic. So I realized earlier in my life that my ability to be optimistic in the face of dire circumstances actually is something that I'm affected with. I have what I called self-imposed persistent optimism, SIPO, S-I-P-O. It is a part of understanding who I am. I have learned in my adult life to boomerang negativity and hopelessness and despair and invoke optimism, or SIPO, self-imposed persistent optimism, into every aspect of my life. So in the face of the worst headlines, the most dire circumstances, I can generate a renewable sense of courage, resource of courage, to see the endless possibilities for all of us, for my life, for each and every day, and for all of humanity. It's with this sense of optimism I am willing to engage with any challenge, any challenger, and any opposition force that may exist or emerge in our shared human quest to achieve happiness, liberty, and justice for all. And what's at stake right now is the question about whether or not humanity will survive or whether we will go extinct. I'm sure you heard all the details about the state of the climate emergency. I know that you heard a lot of details about climate restoration and what's possible with that. And I just want to shift gears and talk about how this personal philosophy is being translated into my political vision and my political advocacy. So I want to make sure that you've seen this diagram, which basically outlines the vision of climate action being three interrelated components. It's restoration, adaptation, and mitigation. They're all interrelated. And I use RAM as the kind of abbreviation for that. And I know that some of you may be Hindu, and Lord Ram is a lord of righteousness and bravery, and a lord of good character. And so I just think the sense of bravery that the sense of Ram brings to the equation is critically important. We have to be brave enough to take on the challenge of implementing a new paradigm of restoration, adaptation, and mitigation. 99% of climate action right now is focused on adaptation and mitigation only. And the Paris Climate Accord that you may have heard about is focused almost exclusively on mitigation and adaptation. And unfortunately, 5 years after the Paris Climate Accord was agreed, it was an excellent framework at the time. The leaders who were in leadership at that time did the best they could to bring together this agreement, and it has had a very positive influence and significant effect. However, it's not working. Global CO2 emissions continue to climb each and every year, and that means that the amount of CO2 that we're pumping up into the universe continues to climb, and then the risk to humanity continues to increase. So I'm advocating for a new paradigm that includes restoration, adaptation, and mitigation that has a goal, the survival of humanity, SOH, survival of humanity. And my view is that the entire political and economic system that we're part of needs to shift its focus from a focus on GDP, gross domestic product, or ROI, return on investment, which are the kind of capitalistic kind of approaches to measuring progress. These metrics have led to a focus on economic growth and extraction and destruction, actually, of our natural world, including our atmosphere. So I'm advocating for a new set of metrics that include SOH. So we should replace GDP with SOH, so that all of our endeavor is aiming towards ensuring the survival of humanity. And ROI, return on investment, or profits, and all that, should be replaced with well-being, life course well-being and happiness. So from birth to death, that we're measuring and creating a world of where people experience well-being and happiness, rather than it's just about how some people have fat pockets and others are living in despair. We can create a world with new metrics like this, with survival of humanity and human well-being and happiness as the new way that we organize ourselves, but it will take a global movement. In terms of my advocacy on climate, I'm focused on advocating for Climate Restoration Emergency Action. And this is applicable here in the United States. It's definitely applicable there in India as well, and any country really. So the definition of Climate Restoration Emergency Action, or CREA for short, CREA, Climate Restoration Emergency Action, is a bold and whole of government and whole of society effort to catalyze a fast transition to a net zero carbon economy by 2030, and a massive effort to remove carbon dioxide and restore our climate by as fast as possible to avoid the worst consequences of climate change and ensure the survival and flourishing of humanity and our natural world. So that is the focus of my advocacy, and I think we need to bring some urgency to this matter because literally humanity is on the brink of a potential extinction event. So we're holding our leaders accountable, and we're holding them accountable for completing and implementing 4 major things. And I'd like to just quickly go over those so you can learn about them, and then we're basically, I'm happy to support you going forward. So number 1, we expect all of our political leaders to declare a climate emergency and to link, which will ensure the survival of humanity. So this can apply to your national government, your state government, and your local government declaring a climate emergency. Number 2, commitments from our political leaders for achieving net zero by 2030 or as soon as possible. Number 3, commitment to remove a trillion tons of CO2 as fast as possible. And number 3, climate restoration emergency action. Number 4, rather, climate restoration emergency action legislation that passes through your parliament, or for, in our example, for our Congress, that provides a plan for both domestic and global action in support of ensuring the survival of all of humanity. So that's an outline of the kind of demands or the kind of expectations that we need to create for all of our political leaders, for all of our business leaders, for all of our religious and community leaders. We need to mobilize a full throttle movement to ensure that everyone makes commitments about ensuring the survival and flourishing of humanity. I look forward to working with you and joining forces in solidarity to bring this vision into reality over the coming weeks, months, and years. I know that we can do it, and I know that by working together, we can learn together and take action together to transform the future of humanity. Thank you, and have a blessed day.
Namaskar. Respected speakers, delightful viewers, participants, and dear students, a very good evening to one and all. I am Chandan Kumar Bhattacharya. It is my proud privilege to propose vote of thanks on behalf of Healthy Climate Initiative Group in the special occasion on the Earth Day, 22nd April 2020. I take this opportunity to express our gratitude to Dr. Sugato Hajra, Mr. Peter Fikowski, Mr. Rick Parnell, Dr. Erika Dodds, Dr. Paul Zaitz for their highly inspiring lecture on climate restoration. We remain deep in debt to all of you for providing a number of ideas to our generation to think and practice to protect our Mother Earth. We promise never to forget you and hope to see you again in our program with more progress in the healthy climate movement. I have been very impressed and touched for the warm-hearted participation of students, parents, and our good citizens for this online program. For that, they deserve a big applause. On behalf of HCI, let me express my sincere thanks and gratitude to Dr. Soumitra Das for his guidance and motivation to us. And at the same time, we are thankful to Susan Lee for helping us in the overseas coordination. We offer our sincere thanks to the web design and Facebook team, namely Shomdatta, Proma, and Shomodip for their effort to promote the program online. We remain obliged to our active members of HCI, among many few names, Mr. Dijodas Ghoshal, Mr. Sudhin Nundi, Mr. A.K. Chatterjee, who are working hard for its recognition and helping us to grow strong. We are indebted to the general members for their suggestion to improve the performance of the organization. Our special thanks to the press and media for their coordination to cover the event. Thank you once again for your active participation to encourage HCI Group to hold this program online. Namaskar.